Stephanie Eberle, and my background is in career counseling. So I want to start a little bit by giving you the perspective of the person on the other side, so the person who is actually being interviewed. The view is that there is always a right answer, and that my goal in the interview is to nail that answer. And I think that's rather unfortunate because it makes the interview more fake, and it makes it very, very difficult to get at the key issues. What we actually need to ask, and what we're probing with, where we're probing. I think the first thing to understand is that you can get anything you want out of the candidate. The candidate will tell you every single thing you've ever wanted to know about them if you have a few things. Number one, if you can build rapport with that candidate, if they trust you. If we ask the right kind of questions, then we can get the right kind of answers we want. And we can't do that unless we know what we want, first of all. So let me start a little bit with the types of questions that you want to ask. When you are thinking about, say, time management skills, I want to assess time management. It's very, very simple for me to think, oh, okay, well, this person has 500 things on their application, and that scares me. So I'm going to ask a question like, what are you doing next quarter or next year? I see you've got a lot on your plate next year, and I can even say, do you have really good time management skills? I might even presume and say, hey, you seem to have a lot of really good time management skills. Presumptions are a really bad idea, because time management skills to me may be very different from you. So, and a straight yes or no doesn't tell me much. And of course, they're not going to tell you in an interview if they don't have them, or I presume they won't. So we have to start with something very different. First of all, I have to understand what my view of time management is. And I have to understand that, in essence, I don't really care at all about how many activities you have. It's not about the activities themselves. It's what your priorities are. I want to know that you are going to prioritize my dorm or my position next year. That's what's important to me. So I have to ask questions that get me to this question of priority, not stripping down how many things you're doing or what you're doing specifically. So I might do that by asking a question such as, how do you plan to prioritize this job next year? Or in the grouping of activities that you have, what is going to be most important? I'd say in a race between deadline and quality, what wins? And this is very scary because there's obviously no right answer to that both answers are correct. What you will get from the candidate is something to the effect of, well, I think both answers are correct. So then we're stuck because they're answering maybe in effect the same way as everybody else. And they're in effect giving you the right answer, which is okay if we're prepared to move it forward. To stop there would be a very, very bad idea. What has to happen next is for me to say, I understand that what you're saying, and I think you're right to some extent, that both matter. But a large portion of the time, a large portion of the job is making these decisions, this decision between these two things. So really, what would you do? Can you give me an example of a time you had to make that decision, and what did you do? And how do you make up for the fact that if I sacrifice quality, when is that quality going to come back? What is the downside to that? So we're talking about open-ended questions, first of all. Open-ended questions are the ones that say, tell me about a time. What has been your experience with? When was the last time you, and how did it turn out? But we're also talking about the probing side of things, probing deeper. Really, that's interesting. Why did you choose that answer? What if things were different? In the example you gave me, if X had happened, what would you have done? This, by the way, creates a conversation as well, that rapport I was talking about earlier, that it feels natural. You like me and I like you, and it gives me a feel of how our interactions are going to be when you're on my staff later. The other thing I would warn you about is that I don't have a correct answer in mind either. One of the things I often say is I really am a little leery of somebody who says, I want this job because my freshman year was either really, really good or really, really bad. But if somebody says that, which they are apt to do, I'm not going to automatically check them off the list and say, no way. I will think about why that is, and I'm not going to make an assumption. I'm not going to assume, oh, well, they had a bad year, so they're trying to just make up for that bad freshman year. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that there's more to the answer, and that's the only assumption I'm going to make, and I'm going to go with that. I do have things I prefer to hear. I prefer to hear about your leadership skills. I prefer to hear that you have struggled with certain things and you have overcome that. I prefer to hear answers that show me you care about the students and the job, not necessarily about getting your own needs met per se. This doesn't have to be boring either. There are some questions that are more fun than others, but that can still be focused on the professional goals we have in mind. There's a really good question I was asked myself once, which is, if you could be a vegetable or a plant form, what would you be? And this is doing a couple of things. Number one, it is looking at your sense of humor. It's looking at how well you do under pressure. But it can tell me something about the candidate as well. For instance, if I get somebody who says, I would be corn, and this is actually what I believe. I shared something personal. I said, I'm from the Midwest, so I'm very familiar with this particular vegetable. But it always grows in pairs. You never see one single stalk of corn growing. And it's got a lot of depth to it. You have to really dig to find the corn itself, the vegetable. So there's a lot there. It's complex. It's really part of our daily life. It's a staple. And I think that I personally can appreciate diversity, and I can get along with myriad people from various walks of life. Finally, it's very, very tall. It's the tallest in the field, and so it's reaching up to the sun, and it seems to be very happy, and that's kind of how I am. I seem to have a positive attitude, and I think as a result, people enjoy working with me. So we really have to understand the why, and we don't get there until we ask sometimes, because our students aren't always there yet. They don't quite understand that when I say, what kind of fruit would you be, they don't always understand that I'm asking and why. So I have to add the why. If I feel nervous about a candidate, if there's something that worries me, it's kind of an old adage, if it seems weird, it probably is. And I believe that it's really better for me to explore that than to let them leave and to allow me then to make these assumptions. So those are pretty much my thoughts, that there's the open-ended question is very, very important. That can come about in a lot of ways. There's the way we phrase it, as well as the opportunity to do role play and scenario questions, so the behavioral type interview piece. And then finally, the probing piece is the most important thing. You've got to be genuine if you expect them to be genuine. If you expect them not to approach this as there is a right answer, there's a yes, no to this. If you expect them to not have that attitude, you can't either. You've got to be very open-minded, but have a general idea of what you expect. And I believe then that you're going to really get some really, really good quality candidates and some insight into what's going on.